Yo, what's good, guys? We are back at it again with a tier list that I'm sure a lot of you guys have been looking forward to. It is going to be our pitching tier list for all starters, all relievers, pre the next team affinity drop. I'm sure it'll have some very solid ones. But in my opinion, we already have some really good pitchers. Some new starters would be appreciated, but the bullpen is arguably in the best spot it's been in the game in a while. So, real quick before we hop into it, if you do enjoy the content, if this does help you out, I would urge you to like and subscribe. We're going to be doing it for the rest of the year, trying to keep you guys updated with everything MLB The Show. So, first card here, Bummer. If you use the Easter Bummer, you know. He was in everybody's bullpen for that entire season, and then some people wild carded him because he was that dominant. There's something to be said when you have a lefty reliever that you don't feel super uncomfortable about pitching to righties with, and that's Aaron Bummer. Plus, he's unhittable lefty-lefty. So one of the best lefty relievers you can possibly have. Easy S tier there. This Rizzo is in a weird spot, and that's just because how he pitches. He's kind of like a junk pitcher, and it's kind of weird. Like, he's probably better against righties than most of your lefty starting pitchers will be. But also he's probably worse against lefties because he just throws a lot of slow junk for the most part. But you can get some rollovers on the cutter. It's interesting. He's, a hit or miss one for sure. But he kind of transcends difficulty through this tier list. I'll definitely be talking about like difficulties and stuff. This Chapman, again, prime Aroldis Chapman, but it's more like a career tribute Chapman because basically it throws every pitch he's ever thrown: four seam, sinker, slider, splitter, circle change. So he throws basically every pitch he's ever thrown. He has double outlier. This card's an absolute goon. If you typically enjoy Chapman cards, you're going to absolutely love this one. Very similar to the one we got last year. That was very good. Austin Riley, fine. I don't know what I want fine to be. I don't know if I want B tier or C tier. I guess we'll see as the list kind of goes out. He can give you good innings. He's not dominant. He's kind of like Greg Maddux in a way, where he throws a sneaky fast sinker and just is more control focused for the most part. Not one of my favorite cards to use. BP Burt. Not a very good card. I believe his hits are behind. His pitch mix is not very good. So like 93 hits, that's probably a little lower than where you want it to be at this part of the season. And then Burt just always has a trash pitch mix. So Rayleigh, another guy similar to Bummer, where if you need a lefty reliever out the pen, two-face lefties, Rayleigh is your guy. The problem with Rayleigh is you don't really want to let him see a righty. He throws really slow. Most righties are probably going to absolutely clobber him. So I think he's a pure lefty specialist, and I don't think he's nearly as good as like Chapman and Bummer and some other guys where you can pitch them to righties and you don't feel like it's going to be a guaranteed home run every time. Bruce Sutter, he's going in the Burt tier. He's not very good. There's a very similar pitcher where if you like this kind of pitch mix, then there's another guy that I prefer way more than him. Just never a great card in the show. Bruzdar, probably A. I think some people would say S just because a lot of people really enjoyed this card in particular from previous years, and they really enjoy using like the silver one and BR and stuff. For me, Bruzdar's always been pretty easy to hit. He's kind of like a BP pitcher to me personally, but I do acknowledge that in theory his mix is pretty good. The problem is just the speed differentials aren't that great on it. Sinker, slider, four seam, cutter, they're all thrown roughly the same speed other than like the slider. So for me personally, he's not super tough to hit, but if you have trouble differentiating that four seam from the sinker from the cutter, then he can definitely be a handful. Byron, fine. I almost want to put him in this Rizzo tier because I feel like he can still give you some good innings. The problem's going to arise if you're higher than All-Star, higher than Hall of Fame. As you go up in difficulty with his really low walks, he's going to have some massive pars. He's going to hang some pitches and just not be super fun to pitch with. So for that reason, I think he's more so in that B tier where if you're just on All-Star, I'm sure he can throw a no-hitter for you. But as you kind of go up in ranks, he's going to struggle to command the zone. Charlie Blackmon, great card here. I believe he has hater release. Just an absolute goon. 118 hits, 108 walks, so that's pretty good. A decent enough clutch, so everything's where you want it to be. And he's got sinker, cutter, circle change, slider, four seam. In my eyes, he's just a lefty, better like Bruzdar kind of pitch mix. But he's another one of these lefties where I feel fine pitching him against righties. He's got the slow cutter to try to get rollovers to steal strikes with. And then he still throws a relatively hard sinker with a slider, with a circle change. Pretty solid card there. Chris Martin, close. I think he kind of lacks the hits to be like an S tier reliever. 112, 125, 125 clutch. It's close. It depends on how much you like this pitch mix. I don't know about having a kind of fast splitter with this mix. I think he's borderline. I think you can make the argument either way. But looking at the guys in the tier, I think I would rather have Chris Martin in my bullpen. I think he probably should be in everybody's bullpen at this exact point in time. So I think that makes him relatively S tier. Ellie can still give you some good outings. I say it all the time, hitting an outlier fastball is hard enough. Hitting an outlier fastball and slider, you're basically at the mercy of the game as to what type of server you get on. And then how well your opponent can pitch with Ellie. Is he dotting backdoor sliders? Is he throwing up and in sliders? There's a lot of creative stuff you can do with an outlier slider. And Ellie can get you some good innings. He can also get absolutely rocked because his mix isn't that great. And he's only a 4-pitch pitcher. Felix, this is who I was alluding to earlier while I was talking about Bruce Sutter. He's just a better version of Sutter. He's just Sutter with an outlier fastball and a somewhat janky release. It's not as hard to hit as it was last year, but he's still relatively tough to hit. And if you just want somebody that you can tunnel that four seam with the slider, with the splitter, Felix is way more your guy than like Bruce Sutter would be. Hunter Brown, fine. He doesn't like the Austin Riley tier. He can give you good outings for sure. If this card had outlier, I think he'd be an easy A tier, but yeah, as is, he's fine. Kind of a juiced overall a little bit just because they lowered his home run through 9, which doesn't matter in DD, and bumped all his other stats. So relatively well statted, just not really super dominant, but you can definitely get some good outings out of him. Same for this Diekman card. He's fine. But again, he kind of runs in like the Buxton problem where this walks is ridiculously low. So as you go up in difficulty, he's going to struggle to find spots, struggle to even find the zone at times, especially if you're not throwing perfects. He's going to hang some pitches. And with no outlier, this isn't really a guy I feel super comfortable pitching to righties with either. If you wanted to drop him down to the B tier, I would hear that out. I don't think he's as dominant as a lot of people play him up to be. John Don, easiest S tier of my life. It's just the best pitcher in the game, in my opinion. Ozone doesn't want to load him, but just take my words for it. Good hits. He's very similar to like the one we got last year where the hits aren't insane, but they're good enough. And then he has the best pitch mix in the game with an outlier slider and an outlier four seam. It's John. It's John, and that's all you really need to know about him. Franco, similar to like Rayleigh, where against lefties, he is kind of hard to hit. He kind of has some of that Rizzo factor where if you're just spamming the screwball, you're almost bailing your opponent out lefty-lefty because you're, throwing them such a slow pitch and giving them forever to think about swinging at it. But if you're just throwing sinkers and sliders and circle changes, and then mixing in the screwball, he is tough to hit lefty-lefty. But again, another guy I'm not really letting face righties. Jose Barreros, I mean, he's fine. He's not great. He's not bad either. Like, you can look at this card and tell me that you had a really good outing with him, and I would believe you. But I don't think it's going to be super consistent. Decent enough card, but not awesome. Jose Trevino, I'm sure some people will want him to probably be S tier. I just, he's a junk pitcher, and anytime there's a junk pitcher, I'm just inclined to believe that as you start to play better players, they're going to get absolutely lit up. But he is decent. He has an okay mix, just as is, and then he's got the slurve and the screwball to mix in. So he's not bad, but he's also not great, in my opinion. J.R. Richard, similar to like earlier in the year, where uh, you could tell me that you threw a no hitter with him, or you could tell me that he gave up 8 runs in the first, and I would believe you either way. It's really a product of who you're playing, how good your opponent is, what their strengths are, what they're weak. If you're playing somebody that can't hit outlier, J.R. Richard's going to eat them alive. Or there is select situations where if you're on legend, he can be really good just from spamming the away slider to righties. But there's so many switch hitters and stuff. I feel like that's relatively niche anyway. So I think actually C tier for him. He's basically a pub stomper. He just kind of hurts people that can't catch up the outlier. I don't think he's inherently a great pitcher. Juan Marichal throws straight junk, so very similar in that regard, where probably beat up on some bad players with him, but as you start to play better players, he's going to get lit up. Screwball, curveball, and a changeup really ain't it. He doesn't throw a super hard fastball either. If you enjoy Fernando Valenzuela, this is almost the right-handed version of him, so maybe you can get some good run out of Marichal, but overall, not really a pitcher I would recommend to too many people. This Profar card, he's cool. He's not, a dominant righty out the pen, but he's a good option. 116 hits, very good walks, decent control or clutch. And then four seam, curveball, is what it is. Circle change, sinker, slurve. So relatively decent pitch mix. It's not anything to write home about, but it is decent. I got Lucas here. He's okay. Like, he's fine. Probably B tier. Does have an outlier sinker. Very similar to like Jason Foley from earlier in the year, if a lot of you guys remember him, where if it's just a guy where you want to have a guy with an outlier sinker in your pen, I can't argue with you including him. But overall, I don't think his mix and his stats are that great to justify him being in like everybody's team, especially when you can run Bruzdar, who has an outlier sinker. You could run Chapman. So I don't think you have to run him. Luke Weaver, probably in this B tier. I mean, out the pen, you can live with them having 4 pitches. They're not 4 great pitches. Knuckle curve, cutter, circle change, fastball. I think he's going to be relatively easy to hit, but he also has maxed hits and max clutch. So as you get to higher difficulties, he might be an okay option, but he's just not going to compete with some of these top guys. Manny Machado, probably similar to like Austin Riley. He's almost bullpen Austin Riley. Does only have 4 pitches, but they're kind of similar in the regard of you're probably throwing a sinker with them 3/4 of the time. And then you're just kind of mixing in the cutter, the 4-seam, and a slurve in Manny's case. So he's not terrible, but he's definitely not one of my go-tos. Mo, close to S tier. I'll put him in S tier. Mo's a guy that always kind of varies from person to person. He's similar to like Corbin Burns, where we've gotten so many good Mo cards over the year that a lot of people have just become somewhat comfortable off hitting him. Even though he does have a good mix and his delivery is a little weird with that like over the top delivery. But a lot of people have just kind of adjusted to him and they're more comfortable than they used to be. But I think in a vacuum, he's still a good pitcher. Mark McGwire, top of A tier for me. He's a good like change of pace guy. Doesn't throw an outlier fastball, just throws a hard fastball. And then also has a sinker and a slider. And a circle change. Really, his go-to pitch is a slider. A good example of how Showzone's not a great way to go about determining value in players is they ranked his slider 167th, but he's throwing that slider 90 plus up to 95 miles an hour. So it's almost like an outlier slider. He has kind of a funky delivery. He has Rob Nin's release. And you can just jam lefties. He's a righty that more so excels to pitching to lefties than even righties. You know, against righties, you can still work that inside sinker, you can still work the four seam, and the circle change and whatnot. But really, he lights up switch hitters and he lights up lefties by jamming them with that really hard, sharp biting slider. Very similar to like a Jacob deGrom kind of out of the pen. So I really do enjoy him. Obviously, if he had outlier on either pitch, he would be better. But he's still decent. Mason Wynn, another one of these Team Affinity pitchers where, yeah, he has outlier. So if you just need guys with outlier, like if I was on All-Star, I would probably have Ellie, Mason Wynn, and Byron Buxton in my bullpen just to have guys with outlier. But as you start to get the higher difficulties, this control is absolutely terrible. Like he's going to have ridiculously big pars, and if you mess up your pitch at all, he's going to leave it right down the middle. But you know, in a vacuum, good pitch mix, has a decent cutter also to get some rollovers on. So not a bad pitcher by any means. He might even be the best of these Team Affinity guys. If you told me you like Mason Wynn in A tier, I wouldn't hate that, but I think he's just too similar to those other guys. Nick Martinez, he's close. He came out a minute ago, I believe. 116, 109. Max out clutch is relatively nice. Four seam, circle, cutter, sinker, 12-6. But I believe his speed differential isn't insane. It's 14, but that's probably off the curveball, which isn't ideal. So like his true speed differential isn't that great. His pitches aren't that great, but I could see him performing at a similar level as like a Rizzo, which is our only other starter in this tier right now. But I think that's about to change because I do like Nolan Arenado a decent amount. This out of position card, he's not terrible. He's not going to gas anybody up, and all of his pitching stats are more or less around that 90 to 100 mark. So maybe a little behind the curve in that regard. But sinker, slider, circle change, cutter, 12-6. In my opinion, he's just kind of a better version of this Austin Riley out of position card. So if you enjoyed that Riley, you could pitch them both in theory. Paul O'Neill, not a terrible lefty reliever, kind of similar to like Rayleigh. Doesn't have very good speed differentials at all. And the one pitch that he has speed differentials on is this slurve, which most decent players are going to recognize immediately out of his hand. So I don't think he's great, but he does have really high hits, really high clutch. So if you're on higher difficulties, you might can get some run out of him. Pedro, I figured was worth including. He probably goes in this like Team Affinity tier where, you know, 101 hits, that's more or less Team Affinity. The control's pretty low, but that's close to Team Affinity guys. The clutch is probably lower than all of them, but also has outlier. And if you enjoy these four seam, circle, cutter, slider, pitch mixes similar to like a Justin Verlander, then you can probably get some good runs still out of Pedro. But by no means an awesome card there. PCA, decent card here. 100 hits, or 110 hits, 70 walks, 112 clutch. Four seam, slider, sinker, slurve, splitter. Kind of reminiscent of like John Donaldson's pitch mix. Not quite as good, but definitely better than all of these Team Affinity guys. A very decent card. Don't want to make it look like he's towards the bottom of A tier, but he's definitely not. And if you've gotten some parallels on him, then he's even better. Quinn Matthews, probably like a C tier guy. I just don't really see it with his mix. Only a four pitch guy, four seam, circle, slider, and a slurve. These are almost the same pitch in my opinion. You will see the slurve's a lot slower than the slider, so you always kind of have that to work off of. But not my favorite card in the world there. Rizal, decent. Probably top of B in my opinion. I don't think he's super hard to hit, but a lot of people really, really like that Team Affinity one from earlier in the year. I think he might have got one other card. So if traditionally you really enjoy Rizal cards and you feel comfortable pitching with them, I'd hear out the argument for like A tier. But in general, I think he's just kind of in that B. Randy, 1A, 1B with John Donaldson for the best pitcher in the game. just kind of up to you. Randy's got the more funky delivery, but John has the outlier slider. But also Randy's no slouch. He throws a really hard slider also. And then the main difference is the breaking ball, the fork ball versus the splitter. Randy's splitter is a lot faster. So I feel like a lot of people don't swing and miss as much, and it's home run galore most of the time when you throw it in the zone. But overall, 1A, 1B for the most dominant pitchers in the game. And, you know, there's nothing really more to it than that. Rich Hill probably goes in this like Burt Blyleven tier. This is a good lesson that not every 99 is a good pitcher or a good card. 109, 101, so decent enough. The walks is really the best thing about this card, in my opinion. Slurve, four seam, cutter, sweeping curve, circle change. A lot of junk. I can see him giving you 3 great innings in ranked. But then after that, you better pull him, because I would hope your opponent will kind of adjust to him by that point, and he'll probably light him up. Riley Green, very similar to like Charlie Blackmon, another lefty where I'm pretty comfortable pitching to righties with. 110, 121, 79, and 104 clutch. So the clutch is a little low. The control's not ideal, but four seam, sinker, slurve, circle, cutter. And he has somewhat of a funky delivery. He basically has Chapman's delivery. So I think you could make the argument that if you want like a more finesse-based Chapman, then Riley Green's your guy, or you can just run them both and have a little bit of like fire and ice going. Definitely a solid reliever out the pen. This Robbie Ray card, probably like top of B tier. He's fine. He can give you decent outings, but he's not going to be great. 105. 94 control, which is really good for like a Robbie Ray card. Typically he's kind of all over the place. Four seam, slider, knuckle curve, circle change, sinker. The sinker really saves him. If he didn't have the sinker, I think he'd probably be in that Burt Blyleven tier. But he's okay. Guidry, he's going in the Burt tier. His pitch mix isn't terrible at face value, and if you're on All-Star and you're running him and you just like this 21 velo differential, then yeah, maybe. But he has 89 hits, which I believe is the lowest on this entire list, and he's a 98 overall. So not my favorite card in the world there. Ryan Walker, great pitcher in real life, having an absolutely phenomenal season for the Giants. Just doesn't really lend himself to being too great in game. If they gave him an outlier sinker, then you could kind of make that like Jason Foley type of argument where I know he's not that good, but I just want an outlier sinker. But you can't really make the argument because he doesn't have it. Sean Manaea, good little like control freak lefty. He, again, another guy where I don't think he looks great, but as you climb in difficulty, I think he can give you some decent outings. 119, 94, good clutch, sinker, slurve, four seam, circle, cutter. Definitely can give you some good outings as you climb in ranks, but on All-Star, not pitching him. Hall of Fame's probably iffy. On Legend, I think is where this guy would really shine. I think he'd probably be top of A tier. Big Show, top of B tier. The epitome of just all over the place. Sometimes he's on and sometimes he's not. I'm sure you guys have used Shohei. You kind of know what I'm talking about. He'll have a game or an inning where he puts every pitch directly in the corner and is basically unhittable. And then he'll have innings where he leaves everything down the middle, or he walks a batter on 5 pitches. It's just kind of how it goes with him. Still has a decent pitch mix, still has that kind of slow cutter that gets a lot of rollovers. Plus, he always gets a good inside edge, so that's kind of a bonus for him. But overall, I'm not really pitching him at this point of the season. Todd Helton, not super up on his pitch mix. I think he's pretty similar to like Nolan Arenado, if I'm not too mistaken there. 116, 96, decent enough control, good clutch, four seam slider, changeup, cutter, sinker, pretty good pitch mix. The velo difference is 15. I imagine that is from the four seam to the changeup. So not a bad pitch to have velo difference like that on. If you use Bob Gibson at all, you kind of already experienced that for the most part, where that changeup tunnel is good with that four seam, and it is ridiculously slow. So I think Todd can give you some good innings. After your opponent catches on to that's kind of his whole shtick, he might start getting lit up a little bit. But he can definitely be a solid pitcher for you. Boggs, I mean, no problem with Boggs out the pen, but also not really somebody I'm looking to bring in. 118, 84, 121 clutch, sinker, curveball, cutter, circle change. It's a decent enough pitch mix. The curveball definitely hurts for sure, but he's fine. You can definitely use him if you really want to. Darvish, probably top of A tier. Darvish traditionally is always kind of a card where for some people he's unhittable and other people he gets absolutely tanked. It's really about the pitch mix. And then this Darvish, not the best hits, not the best walks. So overall, I don't think he's going to be like the control freak World Baseball Classic Darvish that we had last year, where he could just put the pitch in the corner every single time. I don't think he's that, but he can definitely give you some good innings, and definitely could be in everybody's rotation if you really like him. And then Greinke, kind of similar to be honest. Not a terrible card by any means, but also not great. 104, 109. So the walks are actually better with Greinke. And then he also has really decent clutch with really good velo difference. But the problem is most of that velo difference is off this like ephus curveball that he throws. He throws this curveball like 68 to like 74 miles an hour. So it is insanely slow, and once you throw it a couple times, your opponent's going to catch on to it. So really, he just kind of becomes a four-seam slider, sinker, circle change guy. It's pretty cookie cutter. It's pretty default almost. So I think I like Darvish more than him. But if you also enjoy Greinke, I could hear out A tier, but I think I like all the starters in this tier above him for sure. And yeah, guys, that is our pitcher tier list pre the next Team Affinity, which should be coming out in 3 days from the time you are seeing this. Till next time, guys. Peace.